The humid air in the Potomac safe house felt like a physical weight, thick with the scent of ozone and old floor wax. Special Agent Elias Thorne of the FBI's Elite Response Unit adjusted his tie, though the gesture was futile against the creeping dread in his gut. Across the mahogany table sat Director Sarah Vance of the CIA. They were two people who didn't officially exist, discussing a man who was even less than a ghost. "The target is Julian Vane," Vance whispered, sliding a single, blurry photograph across the table. It showed a man in a gray coat disappearing into a crowd in Prague. "He's no longer just a freelancer. Our intercepts suggest he's accepted a contract that shouldn't be possible. He's coming for the first family, all of them. Not just the president, but the wife and the 12-year-old daughter." Thorne looked at the grainy image. Vane was a legend in the darker corners of Langley, a man trained by the very people now hunting him. He didn't use high-tech gadgets or flashy explosives. He used the environment. He was a master of the accidental tragedy. A failed brake line, a tainted prescription, a sudden stroke that was actually a microscopic needle. "Security at the White House is impenetrable," Thorne countered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Not for Vane," Vance replied, her eyes cold. "He isn't going to storm the gates. He's already inside the perimeter of their lives. He's been planning this for 3 years. He knows the cadence of their breathing. If we don't find the thread he's pulling, the American presidency ends in a funeral procession by the weekend." Thorne felt the familiar itch of adrenaline. This wasn't just a chase, it was a race against a shadow that had a head start. The Tactical Operations Center at Langley was a cathedral of flickering monitors and hushed voices. Thorne stood at the center, watching the live feeds from the first family's private residence. Everything looked normal, the mundane rituals of the most powerful people on Earth, but Thorne knew that normalcy was the ultimate camouflage. "Run the staff logs again," Thorne commanded. "I want to know every person who has stepped within 10 feet of the president's daughter, Clara, in the last 48 hours. Director Vance walked up beside him, a tablet in her hand. "The Secret Service vetted everyone, Elias. Cooks, tutors, even the piano tuner. They're all clean. Triple background checks, polygraphs, the works. Clean isn't enough," Thorne snapped. "Vane doesn't replace people, he influences them. Look for the outliers, the person who had a sudden change in debt, a family emergency, or a missed doctor's appointment." A technician signaled from the back row. "Sir, I have something. A maintenance worker named Marcus Reed. He's been on the White House grounds crew for 15 years. Reliable, quiet, but his daughter was admitted to a private clinic in Zurich yesterday. The bill was paid in full, $2 million, via a shell company in the Cayman Islands." Thorne's blood ran cold. "Where is Reed now?" "He's on the south lawn," the technician replied. "Assigned to the irrigation system near the president's morning jogging path." Thorne didn't wait. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. As he ran toward the helipad, he checked his watch. The president was scheduled for his run in exactly 12 minutes. Vane wasn't the one holding the knife this time. He was the one holding the leash of a desperate father. The breach wasn't a flaw in technology. It was a flaw in the human heart. The helicopter touched down on the ellipse with a roar that drowned out the morning birdsong. Thorne sprinted toward the south lawn gate, flashing his credentials at the startled Secret Service agents. "Code Black." "Secure the president," he screamed over the wind. He saw Marcus Reed near the rosebushes. The man looked pale, his hands trembling as he adjusted a heavy brass valve in the irrigation housing. Thorne tackled him just as the president emerged from the west colonnade in his jogging gear. "Don't touch it," Thorne yelled as other agents swarmed the area, shielding the commander-in-chief. Reed didn't fight back. He collapsed into the grass, weeping. "He said they would kill her, Agent. He said she'd never wake up from the surgery if I didn't turn the valve." Thorne looked at the valve. It wasn't an explosive. It was a pressurized delivery system. A subtle, colorless gas, likely a concentrated neurotoxin, was primed to be released into the mist of the lawn's automatic sprinklers. It would have looked like a sudden cardiac arrest. "Where is he, Marcus?" Thorne hissed, pulling the man up by his collar. "Where is Vane?" Reed pointed a shaking finger toward the historic Lafayette Square across the street. "The window, the third floor of the Hay Adams Hotel. He's watching." "He's always watching." Thorne looked up. Through the glass of the luxury hotel, he caught a glimpse of a man standing perfectly still. The figure didn't run. He raised a hand in a mocking salute before stepping back into the shadows of the room. The game had truly begun. Vane wanted them to know he was there. He wanted them to feel the shadow over their shoulders. The tactical team breached room 302 of the Hay Adams with surgical precision. Flashbangs detonated, filling the air with white light and stinging smoke, but when the dust settled, the room was empty. Elias Thorne stepped inside, his boots crunching on broken glass. The room was meticulously clean, except for a single chair positioned directly in front of the window overlooking the White House. On the small wooden desk sat a burner phone and a handwritten note. Thorne picked it up with gloved fingers. Precision is a lost art, Elias. You saved a life today, but you didn't stop the clock. Every heartbeat in that house is a countdown I've already started. Vance entered the room, her face tight with frustration. He's gone. Security footage shows him leaving through the service elevator 3 minutes before you hit the lawn. He wore a maintenance uniform. He walked right past our perimeter. He's playing with us, Thorne said, staring at the note. The irrigation system was a distraction. He wanted us to focus on the president so we'd pull resources away from the others. The First Lady, Vance realized, her voice dropping an octave. She's at the gallery opening at the Smithsonian tonight. Thorne grabbed the burner phone just as it began to vibrate. He answered it, but no one spoke. Instead, a recording began to play. It was the sound of a violin, a specific haunting melody that Thorne recognized from his own childhood. It was a lullaby. He's not just targeting the president's family, Thorne whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He's targeting mine, too. He's showing me he knows everything. We aren't the hunters anymore, Sarah. We're the bait. The Smithsonian American Art Museum was a fortress of tuxedos and evening gowns. Underneath the glitz, however, was a layer of concealed weapons and earpieces. Thorne moved through the crowd, his eyes scanning every face. The First Lady, Eleanor Sterling, was radiant in midnight blue, moving through the donors with practiced grace. I have eyes on the north exit, Vance's voice crackled in his ear. Teams are in the rafters and the basement. If Vane breathes in this building, we'll hear it. Thorne wasn't comforted. Vane didn't work in the ifs. He worked in the whens. Thorne stopped near a large abstract painting. He noticed a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes. The man's gait was slightly off, a subtle limp that suggested a hidden weight in his right trouser leg. Thorne began to move toward him, but a sudden commotion at the main entrance drew everyone's attention. A man had collapsed near the coat check, seizing violently. The crowd gasped, and the Secret Service detail instinctively tightened their circle around Eleanor. Distraction, Thorne muttered to himself. He ignored the seizing man and focused back on the waiter, but the waiter was gone. Thorne spun around, searching the sea of silk and wool. He saw a silver tray abandoned on a pedestal. On it sat a single glass of champagne, bubbling quietly. Next to it was a small, black feather. Sarah, move the First Lady now, Thorne shouted into his comms. He's not using a gun, he's using the crowd. Suddenly, the lights went out. The museum plunged into absolute darkness, and the refined atmosphere shattered into a chorus of screams. In the blackness, Thorne heard the distinct, metallic click of a suppressed pistol being readied. In the pitch-black gallery, Thorne's world narrowed to sound and instinct. The screams of the socialites provided a chaotic backdrop, but he filtered them out, listening for the rhythmic breathing of a professional. Thwip. A suppressed shot hissed past Thorne's ear, shattering a marble bust behind him. He dropped to one knee, drawing his sidearm. He didn't fire. He couldn't risk hitting a civilian. First Lady is secure in the vault. Vance's voice was frantic over the radio. But Thorne, we have a problem. The thermal cameras are being looped. We're seeing a recorded feed. We can't see where you are. Vane is in the room, Thorne whispered. He's using NVGs. Tell the team to fire flares outside the windows. Blind him. A moment later, the windows erupted in a blinding magnesium glow. The white light flooded the hall, silhouetting a figure standing near the grand staircase. It was the waiter, but he had discarded the jacket. He wore a tactical vest and a mask. Thorne fired 2 rounds. The figure rolled behind a column, returning fire with terrifying accuracy. One of Thorne's backup agents fell, clutching his shoulder. You're slowing down, Elias, a voice called out, a smooth, cultured baritone that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The Smithsonian is a tomb. Did you really think you could protect them all? Thorne moved to flank the column, but as he rounded the corner, he found only a discarded tactical vest and a pair of night vision goggles. Vane had vanished into the panicked crowd as the emergency lights flickered on. On the wall, written in red lipstick taken from a dropped clutch bag, were 3 words, the daughter next. St. Jude's Academy sat nestled in the rolling hills of Virginia, a secluded fortress for the children of the elite. Clara Sterling, the president's daughter, was supposed to be the most protected child in the world. After the museum attack, the school had been locked down by a full platoon of rangers. Thorne arrived by Black Hawk, his face etched with exhaustion. He met the school's headmistress and the lead Secret Service agent in the wood-paneled library. She's in the safe room, the agent reported. Biometric locks, no windows. We have a drone perimeter 5 miles deep. Vane doesn't fly drones, Thorne said, pacing the room. He's a ghost. He finds the one thing you trust and turns it against you. Who handles the school's digital infrastructure, the fire suppression, the air filtration. It's all handled by a firm in D.C., the headmistress replied. They've been our contractors for a decade. Thorne sat down at a computer terminal. He began digging into the firm's recent logs. His heart skipped a beat when he saw a routine maintenance patch uploaded just an hour ago. The source IP was routed through a server in Singapore, but the code's signature was familiar. It was the same encryption Vane had used in Prague. He's not coming for her physically, Thorne realized. He's going to lock her in. Suddenly, the heavy steel door of the library slammed shut. The magnetic locks engaged with a heavy thud. Over the intercom, a soft, electronic hum began to rise in pitch. "The fire suppression system," Thorne yelled, banging on the door. "He's overridden the halon gas protocols. He's going to suffocate everyone in the safe room, and we're locked out of the controls." The safe room where Clara Sterling sat was designed to withstand a nuclear blast, but it was now becoming a vacuum. Inside, the halon gas, intended to extinguish fires by displacing oxygen, was being pumped in at a lethal rate. Through the reinforced glass observation port, Thorne could see the young girl gasping for air, her hands clawing at her throat. "Override the system," Thorne screamed at the technicians outside the library door via his radio. "We can't, sir. He's locked us out of the mainframe. It's a dead man's switch," a voice crackled back. "If we cut the power, the backup batteries will just accelerate the pumps." Thorne looked around the library. There had to be a physical bypass. He spotted a heavy bronze statue of the school's founder. With a grunt of effort, he hoisted the statue and began slamming it against the library's ventilation duct. "Vance, get to the roof," Thorne shouted into his comms. "The primary intake is shielded, but the exhaust vents are mechanical. You have to jam them manually." As Thorne battered the duct, he saw a small camera lens in the corner of the room tilt toward him. Vane was watching. The killer wanted Thorne to witness the failure. With a final, desperate swing, Thorne broke through the metal. He scrambled into the narrow, dark crawlspace, his shoulders scraping against the jagged edges. He crawled toward the safe room's junction, his lungs burning from the stray gas leaking into the vents. He reached the manual release lever just as Clara collapsed on the floor inside. He pulled it with everything he had. The lever groaned, resisted, and then finally snapped open. A rush of fresh air whistled through the pipes. Clara took a shuddering breath. She was alive, but as Thorne slumped against the vent, his radio buzzed. It was Vane's voice, clear and chilling. "Well done, Elias. You saved the girl. Now who's going to save the president?" The president had been moved to Camp David, the ultimate mountain sanctuary. Surrounded by miles of forest, electrified fences, and the best soldiers in the world, it was the safest place on the planet, or so they thought. Thorne arrived at the command center, his clothes torn and stained with dust from the school. Director Vance met him, her face a mask of cold fury. "We've got the entire area on a thermal blanket. Nothing moves without us knowing. If Vane tries to enter the woods, he'll be vaporized by automated turrets." "He's already here," Thorne said, his voice raspy. "He's been here the whole time." Vance frowned. "That's impossible. We did a full sweep of every person on site. Biometrics, DNA, the works. No one is out of place." Thorne walked over to the topographical map of the camp. "He told me he'd started a countdown." He said he was pulling a thread. "Think about it, Sarah. Why the president's daughter? Why the first lady? Why the accidental failures?" "To distract us," Vance said. "No," Thorne corrected. "To move us. He's been herding the president like cattle. He wanted the president here at Camp David during a thunderstorm." As if on cue, a massive crack of thunder shook the cabin. Rain began to lash against the windows. "The storm knocks out the low-altitude drones," Thorne noted. "And the president has a ritual, doesn't he? Every time there's a storm at Camp David, he goes to the old chapel to pray. Alone." Vance's eyes widened. She grabbed her radio. "Eagle is in the chapel. Secure the perimeter," but the radio only emitted static. The storm wasn't just weather, it was cover for a high-frequency jammer. Thorne drew his weapon and ran out into the pouring rain toward the small stone chapel on the hill. The chapel was a small, rustic building of stone and timber, standing isolated at the edge of a cliff. Thorne pushed the heavy oak doors open. The interior was lit only by flickering candles, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. President Sterling was kneeling at the altar, his back to the door. He didn't turn around. "Mr. President, we need to move," Thorne shouted, his gun raised, scanning the rafters. "He's not here, Elias," the president said quietly. His voice sounded hollow, tired. Thorne froze. Something was wrong. The president's posture was too rigid. He stepped closer and realized the president wasn't kneeling. He was tied to the altar rail, his mouth gagged with silver tape. From the darkness behind the altar, Julian Vane stepped out. He wasn't wearing a mask or a uniform. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, looking more like a CEO than a killer. In his hand, he held a small detonator. "You're late," Vane said, checking his watch, "but I suppose the rain complicates things." "Drop it, Vane," Thorne said, his sight fixed on Vane's chest. "There's no way out. The Rangers are 60 seconds away. The Rangers are currently busy with a fire in the motor pool," Vane replied calmly. I don't need a way out. I've already achieved my goal. Do you know why I'm doing this, Elias? It's not for the money, it's for the truth. What truth? Thorne demanded, his finger tightening on the trigger. The truth about what this man did in 1998, before he was a hero, before he was a president. He was a shadow just like us, and he left a trail of bodies in his wake that the CIA worked very hard to bury. I was one of those bodies, Elias, or at least I was supposed to be. Vane smiled, a cold, empty expression. I'm not here to kill him, I'm here to make him watch. Thorne's heart hammered against his ribs. The rain lashed against the stained glass, creating a rhythmic drumming that filled the silence of the chapel. He kept his weapon leveled at Vane's heart, but the killer didn't seem to care. 1998, Thorne repeated, his mind racing through declassified files. The Belgrade incident, that was a Black Ops extraction gone wrong. They said everyone was wiped out by a local militia. They said, Vane mocked, his thumb hovering over the detonator. But the militia didn't pull the triggers. Our own government did. They wanted to erase the evidence of a botched assassination. Sterling was the young intelligence officer who signed the clean sweep order. He sacrificed 12 of his own men to protect his career path to the White House. President Sterling's eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of terror and deep, agonizing guilt. He tried to speak through the gag, but only a muffled groan emerged. I was the 13th man, Elias, Vane continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. I crawled out of a mass grave with a bullet in my lung and fire in my soul. I've spent 28 years becoming the monster he created, and tonight the cycle completes. If you kill him, you prove him right, Thorne argued, trying to buy time. You become the threat he claimed you were. Let him face a trial, let the world see the truth. Vane laughed, a dry, hacking sound. A trial in this city. He owns the judges, the media, and the history books. No, Elias, justice isn't a courtroom. Justice is a reckoning. Suddenly the floorboards creaked behind Thorne. He didn't turn, but he felt the presence. Vane wasn't alone, he never was. Drop the gun, Agent Thorne, a familiar voice commanded from the shadows of the vestibule. It was Agent Miller, Thorne's own second-in-command. Thorne didn't move. Miller, what are you doing? Ensuring the debt is paid, Miller said, his voice devoid of emotion. He stepped into the light, his service weapon aimed at the back of Thorne's head. You think Vane is the only one who lost someone in Belgrade. My father was on that team. He died for a lie, while Sterling lived to become a legend. Thorne felt the world shifting beneath his feet. The conspiracy wasn't just Vane. It had infected the very team he trusted to protect the president. How many others, Miller? Thorne asked, his eyes still locked on Vane. Enough, Vane answered for him. Your elite response unit is divided. Half are loyal to the flag, the other half are loyal to the ghosts of the past. It's a civil war in miniature, played out in the dark. Vane stepped toward the president, the detonator glinting in the candlelight. I'm not going to blow up the chapel, Elias. This detonator doesn't trigger C4. It triggers a global upload. Every document, every photo, every recorded confession of Sterling's crimes. It goes to every major news outlet on the planet simultaneously. Then why the threats against his family? Thorne asked, confused. Because I needed him to feel the fear, Vane hissed. I needed him to know what it feels like to have the people you love in the crosshairs of a man who doesn't exist. I wanted him to see his legacy crumble before his eyes. Miller stepped closer to Thorne. Give us the weapon, Elias. You're a good man, but you're guarding a grave. Let the truth come out. Thorne looked at the president, then at Vane. He was caught between a murderer and a man who had built a life on a mountain of secrets. The tension in the chapel was a physical force stretching toward a breaking point. Thorne's mind flickered through his oath of office to protect the president from all enemies, foreign and domestic. But who was the enemy here? The man who had committed a crime decades ago, or the man seeking a bloody vengeance? If you release that data, Thorne said slowly, you'll destabilize the entire country. You'll trigger a collapse of trust that could lead to riots, to war. You aren't just punishing one man, you're punishing millions. People deserve the truth, Miller barked, no matter the cost. The truth is rarely pure and never simple, Thorne countered. In a sudden, blurred motion, Thorne didn't drop his gun. Instead, he spun, using Miller's shock to his advantage. He swept Miller's arm aside and fired a non-lethal shot into the agent's leg. Miller screamed and went down. Thorne immediately pivoted back to Vane, but the killer was faster. Vane lunged toward the president, pulling a ceramic blade from his sleeve. He wasn't going to wait for the data upload. He wanted the visceral satisfaction of the kill. Thorne fired, but Vane used the president as a human shield, twisting Sterling's bound body in front of him. Thorne had to hold his fire. You can't save him and stop me, Elias, Vane shouted over the roar of the wind. Just then the stained glass windows shattered. Director Vance and a team of loyalist tactical agents swarmed the chapel, descending from the rafters on fast ropes. The room exploded into chaos, smoke grenades hissed, and the air was filled with the shouting of commands. In the confusion, Vane dropped the detonator. It skittered across the stone floor toward the edge of a floor vent. The chapel became a blur of tactical light and gray smoke. Thorne dived for the detonator, but a stray bullet from a rogue agent, one of Miller's hidden allies, struck the stone inches from his hand, sending sparks into his eyes. "Secure the president," Vance's voice cut through the noise. Thorne rolled, his vision clearing just in time to see Vane disappear through a trapdoor behind the altar. The killer was escaping into the ancient tunnels beneath Camp David, tunnels that dated back to the Cold War. Thorne didn't wait for orders. He grabbed the detonator just as it was about to fall into the vent and shoved it into his pocket. He scrambled through the trapdoor, plunging into a world of damp concrete and dim orange emergency lights. The tunnels echoed with the sound of retreating footsteps. Vane was fast, but he was wounded. Thorne could see drops of blood on the floor. "You can't run forever, Julian," Thorne yelled, his voice echoing in the narrow corridor. "I don't need forever," Vane's voice drifted back, eerie and disembodied. "I only need 10 minutes. The upload is on a timer. The detonator you're holding, it's just the manual override. The clock is already at 0, Elias. The servers are just waiting for the final handshake." Thorne checked the device. Vane was telling the truth. A small LCD screen showed a countdown, 0:08 and 42 seconds. He had less than 9 minutes to find the transmitter and shut it down, or the world would change forever. But Vane was waiting in the dark, and in these tunnels, the ghost of Belgrade had the home field advantage. The tunnels beneath Camp David were a labyrinth of rusted pipes and humming electrical conduits. Thorne moved with his back against the wall, his flashlight cutting a lonely path through the dark. He could feel the humidity rising. They were moving deeper into the mountain. "Why the tunnels, Vane?" Thorne called out. "You could have ended this in the chapel. The transmitter is at the old communication hub." Vane's voice crackled through a wall-mounted intercom. "It's a hardened site. No one can jam the signal from down here, not even your precious Director Vance." Thorne reached a junction and paused. To the left, the smell of salt and old grease. To the right, a faint hum of cooling fans. He turned right. Suddenly, a tripwire snapped. Thorne threw himself backward as a series of flashbulbs detonated along the walls, designed not to kill, but to permanently sear the retinas of anyone following. Thorne covered his eyes, but the brilliance still burned through his eyelids. Before he could recover, a heavy blow caught him in the ribs. Vane was on him. They tumbled into the dark, a frantic scramble of limbs and steel. Vane was a master of close-quarters combat, his movements precise and lethal. He struck for Thorne's throat, but Thorne caught his wrist. The two men locked in a desperate struggle for the ceramic blade. "You're fighting for a ghost, Elias," Vane hissed, his face inches from Thorne's. "Sterling is already dead. Even if he lives, he's a hollow shell." "I'm not fighting for him," Thorne gasped, straining against Vane's strength. "I'm fighting for the people who believe in the office, for the stability of the world." With a burst of adrenaline, Thorne kicked Vane back, but the killer rolled and vanished into a side service duct. Thorne stumbled into the hub, a room filled with vintage 1960s tech supplemented by modern server racks. At the center of the room, a laptop was connected to a satellite uplink. The screen showed a progress bar. 92% complete. Vane was standing by the console, his hand over a massive red lever. "This is the manual kill switch for the camp's cooling system," Vane explained. "If I pull this, the servers overheat, the fire suppression kicks in, and the whole hub is sealed in a vacuum. No one gets in or out for an hour. By then, the truth is out." Thorne leveled his gun at the laptop. "I can just destroy the computer." "Go ahead," Vane challenged. "The data is already in the buffer. Destroying the hardware now won't stop the transmission. It will only ensure it can't be retracted if the files are corrupted." Thorne looked at the timer. 0:03 and 15 seconds. "Vane, listen to me," Thorne said, lowering his voice. "I know about your daughter." Vane froze. The cold, calculated mask slipped for a fraction of a second. "What did you say?" "I did my own digging while you were playing games at the school," Thorne lied partially. He had seen a name in the Belgrade files that Vance had tried to hide. "Lara, she was 4 years old. She wasn't in the grave with you, she was taken. She's alive, Julian. They gave her a new name. They gave her a life so you'd never find her." Vane's hand trembled on the lever. "You're lying." "Sterling told me they were all gone." "Sterling was told they were all gone," Thorne corrected. "But the agency keeps assets. They kept her as leverage against you in case you ever surfaced. If you release that data, they'll kill her to erase the last link." The progress bar hit 96%. The hum of the servers seemed to grow into a deafening roar. Vane stared at Thorne, his eyes searching for a lie, a tremor, anything that would betray a bluff. "Where is she?" Vane whispered. "Let the timer run out and you'll never know," Thorne said, his heart racing. He was gambling everything on a hunch and a few redacted lines he'd seen in a CIA psych profile. "Stop the upload and I'll take you to her. I'll go against Vance, I'll go against the president, but you have to stop it now." Vane looked at the screen, 98%. He doesn't deserve to keep his secret, Vane said, his voice cracking. He destroyed my life, and you're about to destroy hers, Thorne countered. She's a teacher in Oregon, Julian. She has a life, a family. If the Belgrade files go public, her real identity comes out. The enemies you made over the last 20 years, they'll go for her first. Vane's hand moved away from the lever and toward the keyboard. His fingers hovered over the cancel key. If you're lying to me, Elias, I will spend the rest of my life making you regret it. I'm not lying, Thorne said, though his conscience screamed. He knew Vance had moved the girl years ago, but he didn't know if she was still under agency protection or if she had been disposed of to simplify the books. Vane hit the key, the screen turned red, transmission aborted. Silence fell over the hub. Vane slumped against the server rack, the fire in his eyes replaced by a hollow, desperate hope. Thorne exhaled, a breath he felt he'd been holding since the Potomac safe house. Now, Vane said, take me to my daughter. Before Thorne could respond, the heavy steel door of the hub exploded inward. It wasn't the Rangers, it wasn't Vance's team. 6 men in black tactical gear, wearing no insignia, flooded the room. They didn't shout commands, they fired immediately. Vane reacted with his supernatural speed, throwing Thorne behind a heavy steel desk just as a hail of bullets shredded the server racks. Clean up, crew, Vane yelled over the gunfire. Sterling's personal shadow team. They aren't here to arrest us, Elias. They're here to make sure neither of us ever leaves this mountain. Thorne returned fire, his mind reeling. The president had his own private force, it made sense. A man with secrets that deep wouldn't rely solely on the official agencies. We have to move, Thorne shouted. He grabbed a flash grenade from his belt and tossed it into the center of the room. Under the cover of the burst, Thorne and Vane moved as one, an unlikely alliance of the hunter and the prey. They moved through the back service exit, heading further into the ventilation shafts. They'll have the exits blocked, Vane said, checking his handgun. There's an old drainage pipe that leads to the reservoir. It's a half-mile crawl through freezing water. Lead the way, Thorne said. As they crawled through the narrow, wet pipe, Thorne's radio hummed. It was Vance, but her voice was distorted by static. Thorne, come in. The president is. He's ordered a level 5 sanitization. Elias, get out of there. He's trying to kill everyone who knows. Thorne looked at Vane in the dim light of the pipe. The killer smiled, a grim, knowing look. Now you see, Elias, Vane whispered. There are no heroes in this story, only survivors. They emerged from the drainage pipe into the biting cold of the mountain night. The reservoir was a black mirror, surrounded by dense pines. In the distance, the lights of Camp David flickered through the trees. They're coming, Vane said, pointing to the heat signature drones circling above the tree line. We have maybe 5 minutes before they lock onto our thermal trail. Thorne turned to Vane. The data, you said you aborted it. But you kept a copy, didn't you? Vane reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted thumb drive. I'm a professional, Elias. I always have a backup, but I'll give it to you, on one condition. The girl, Thorne said. No, Vane replied. I know you were lying about Oregon. I saw it in your eyes. You don't know where she is, but Vance does. I want you to get the truth from her. And then I want you to decide what to do with this drive. Vane handed the drive to Thorne. If you give it to the authorities, it disappears. If you give it to the press, the world burns. But if you keep it, you own the President of the United States. Suddenly, a red laser dot appeared on Vane's chest. Move, Thorne screamed, tackling Vane into the water just as a sniper's bullet hissed through the air. They ducked behind a rocky outcrop. The shadow team was closing in from 3 sides. There was no escape. Thorne looked at his weapon. He had 1 magazine left. Vane had none. Elias, Vane said, his voice remarkably calm. I was never going to survive this. I knew that when I left Prague, but you're the only one left who can tell the story. Vane stood up, drawing the sniper's attention. No, Thorne reached for him, but Vane was already running toward the trees, drawing a massive volley of gunfire. The morning sun rose over Washington, D.C., cold and indifferent. Special Agent Elias Thorne sat on a park bench in Lafayette Square, looking at the White House. He looked older, his face etched with new lines of exhaustion. Director Vance sat down next to him. She didn't look at him. The official report is finalized. Julian Vane was killed in a shootout at Camp David while attempting to assassinate the president. Agent Miller was a rogue element who acted alone. You're being fast-tracked for a Silver Star, Elias. And the president, Thorne asked quietly, recovering from the trauma. His approval ratings are at an all-time high. The country is united behind him. Thorne felt the weight of the thumb drive in his pocket. He had spent the last 48 hours decoding the contents. It was all there. Belgrade. The clean sweep, the names of the 12 men who died for Sterling's ambition. And one more thing, the location of Vane's daughter. She wasn't in Oregon. She was in a quiet suburb of Maryland, living under a name provided by the CIA. Vane's daughter, Thorne said, I want her out, give her a clean slate. No more monitors, no more guardians, or I start talking. Vance finally looked at him, her eyes narrowing. "Are you threatening the agency, Elias?" "I'm providing a service," Thorne replied, standing up. "The president is a hero. The truth is buried. Let's keep it that way. But the girl is off limits." Forever, he walked away, leaving Vance alone on the bench. He had saved the president's life, but he had lost his faith in the flag. As he crossed the street, he stopped by a trash can and dropped a small, encrypted thumb drive into the bin. The world didn't need to burn today, but the shadow of Julian Vane would always be there, a silent footfall in the halls of power, reminding the man in the Oval Office that even ghosts have memories.